Hello, and welcome to the New Europe studios on Place Jourdan in Brussels. I am Dan Alexei. With us today, Mr. Vladimir Chizhov, Russia's ambassador to the European Union. Welcome, Ambassador.
Good afternoon.
This is the second or third time you came to us?
I
Second
haven't counted.
Let me ask you, it seems you can take Kiev in 2 weeks, apparently. It's been said in a conversation between President Putin and President of the Commission, José Manuel Barroso.
Were you there listening?
Well, Barroso said so, apparently.
I don't know whether it rests with President Barroso to either confirm or deny that.
Okay, but you don't know how much time would you need to. Okay, how would you explain to the West the concept of New Russia, Novorossiya, that President Putin used, and apparently it created a lot of panic?
Well, it's actually a term that dates back to the times of Catherine the Great, 18th century, when those geographical areas became part of the Russian Empire.
It's not something that Vladimir Putin invented.
No.
It existed.
No, and I would say it should be treated, well, just like, you know, reference to several states in the United States called New England. I don't think it has anything to do with current relationship between the United States and Britain.
So it's a historical notion
It is.
covering the...
Cover a certain geographical area.
That's Crimea and...
Well, actually, yes, Crimea too, and the areas of Donbass, so southeastern Ukraine, I would say.
But at the time...
And the rest was called Malorussia, or Small Russia.
That's what we call today Belarusia and
No.
Ukraine.
Belarus is White Russia, and
And the rest of
Malorussia,
Ukraine is
centered around Kiev, is the Small Russia.
the Small Russia.
So everything apart from Western Ukraine, which actually was not part of the Russian Empire, and some countries belonging now to the European Union are vividly remembering that they used to own parts of that land. That is today's Poland, Slovakia, and Hungary. In the old days, Austro-Hungarian Empire.
But the reuse of this notion of New Russia doesn't put into doubt the Ukrainian identity as a nation.
Of course it doesn't. It has no ethnic reference, just geographical and historical.
And historical. Then how do you explain the fact that the West sees now Russia as an enemy? The NATO Secretary General Anders Fogh Rasmussen even said that Russia is an unfriendly nation. Where did it start?
Well, I think that consciously or subconsciously, it has always been there. I would quote one of the Russian emperors, the lesser known Alexander III, the penultimate one, who said once that Europe is afraid of Russia merely because of Russia's greatness in terms of size.
So with Yeltsin, we just had a lull in the relations.
I wouldn't call it a lull. It was a period when the Soviet Union collapsed, as you know, and it was a time of major turbulence as far as the economy is concerned, and also domestic politics. So these were difficult times, and
More difficult than today?
I think much more difficult than today, because
Quest for identity.
quest for identity, I would say economic sufferings for a great percentage, a great portion of the population, which is not there today, and also
might come back with the sanctions.
loss,
No.
a loss of sense of motherland, which had been perceived as the Soviet Union,
And the New Russia that you lost.
including the New Russia.
Does Russia feel betrayed by the West, by the fact that the West promised not to expand militarily into Eastern Europe? Some promises have not been kept.
Well, a lot of promises have not been kept, including promises that NATO would not expand eastwards. Those promises were oral, they were not put on paper. But in those days, the Soviet leadership, the last Soviet leadership under Mikhail Gorbachev, I would say, was naive enough to trust those commitments.
How about Yeltsin?
I wouldn't know, perhaps him too.
So do you feel like the West turned its back to Russia, or there was some huge misunderstanding?
I think the West overall, and by saying the West, I mean both Western Europe and the United States, I think they lost this chance of creating a really an equal partnership at that stage with Russia, preferring to pursue their geopolitical goals.
In this view, would Eastern Europe have been something like a buffer zone?
Well, I wouldn't regard it as a buffer zone, but I have a sense that the West regarded these countries as it is regarding Ukraine today, as a geopolitical playground.
You said that the sanctions do not affect the day-to-day life of the citizens.
I didn't say so.
So they do affect the life?
They do affect in the sense that they are serving as a huge impetus to develop domestic production, be it of food or industrial goods.
You are talking about a positive effect of the sanctions?
Yes. The negative effect, yes. Some Russians may miss some of the particular French cheeses.
And in cultural and moral terms, the young generations who are dreaming of the West?
The young generations, I don't think they were dreaming of the West. They're dreaming of their own country being treated as an equal, the way it deserves.
Moscow says it wants to protect the rights of Russian speakers in Ukraine and in what you called New Russia.
Across the world, I would add.
Across the world, including in Kazakhstan, we heard recently.
Including in Western Europe, including in the Baltics.
But this scares the Baltics, where there's a sizable minority living there.
Probably because they fail to understand what protection of minorities is. They have been neglecting their own minorities for over 20 years, actually mistreating them. You know, when the Soviet Union was collapsing, the three Baltic republics organized referenda which led to them proclaiming independence. And everybody voted, including the ethnic Russians. And I would say the majority voted for independence. But the next day they were told, okay, we don't need you anymore. You can pack and go. Even today, the seats allocated to those countries in the European Parliament are counted on the basis of the overall population, though the Russian-speaking minorities are deprived of voting rights.
Yes, but on the other hand, we all know that the three Baltic countries were never accepted as part of the Soviet Union by the Americans, by the United Nations. They had a separate status. So
they didn't have a separate status. There was a separate policy on the part of those Western countries, which did not prevent them to sign the Helsinki Final Act, for example, in 1975, and make statements, including the then US President Gerald Ford, actually de facto accepting the fact that the Baltic countries were perceived as part of the Soviet Union. So that didn't matter much. Okay, high-level delegations from the West did not travel to those three republics. Well, other foreign leaders did.
But what stops you from giving them reassurances that nothing bad to them would happen?
Well,
Because the situation is rather tense.
the situation is artificially tense. Russia has no intention. When we speak about protecting Russian speakers, we mean by political, diplomatic, and moral means, by promoting, Russian language, Russian culture, by actually drawing the attention of the European Union, of the Council of Europe, to facts where there are deficiencies of their rights. But it doesn't mean that to all the countries where there are Russian speakers, and there are many, by the way, in other parts of the world, that Russian tanks will necessarily have to roll.
When you speak about the rights of the Russian minorities in the Baltic countries, would you go as far as to ask, for instance, for Russian to be accepted as an official language of the EU?
Well, I know the existing rules within the European Union. In order for a language to be accepted as an official language of the EU, at least one EU member state should recognize it as an official language. That has not happened so far.
Until now. How do you view the negotiations inside the EU, inside the institutions, with the formation of the new Commission, and concerning the overall attitude towards Russia? It's been said that it's a good thing for Europe that people like Donald Tusk, the new president of the Council, is a hawk and knows about Russia and can take a stand against Russia. How do you view all this?
Well, I trust that whoever is in charge within the European Union in those posts, including the posts of President of the European Council, President of the Commission, High Representative, and members of the Commission, which we have yet to see, that all of them will be reflecting the common position of the European Union, and not their national, and of course not their personal positions or views or ambitions.
Well, in the case of Tusk, it's not his personal position, it's Poland's position. Poland had always had a defiant attitude towards Russia.
Well, should I quote the treaty of the European Union, which says that persons delegated to those posts should be elected on the basis of their meritocracy and independence, meaning that whoever is, I will repeat, whoever is in charge should be reflecting not the national position, but the position of the EU as a whole.
On the other hand, the future, apparently the future High Commissioner for Foreign Affairs of the EU, High Representative Federica Mogherini, has been said to be Russia-friendly. How do you view this?
Well, I didn't say that. Some people did, but I think that what I said about the previous individual fully refers to her as well.
In the West's attitude of defiance towards Russia, there are many elements. One of them is the new law concerning the NGOs in Russia, viewed as foreign agents. Don't you think there is a basis for mistrust there?
Well, there is an evident mistrust on the part of the Western countries, perhaps based on misunderstanding. Actually, the term foreign agent was borrowed from the existing US legislation.
But we are in Europe.
Yes, but we're all in the OSCE, aren't we? And the OSCE is the place where these issues are discussed.
So why blaming NGOs that get some financing from abroad?
Nobody's blaming them. They're only requested.
But they have to register separately.
Only those who are engaged in political functions, only those should register. And not to the extent as they are in the United States, and where they have to fill in questionnaires for the FBI of dozens of pages.
Yeah, but again, we are in Europe. How about
of course we are.
How about the soldier smugglers?
The situation in many European countries is not entirely different from that of the United States.
What countries?
Well, I would refer to the United Kingdom, for example. France too.
And how about the soldiers' mothers? They have been blamed recently as being foreign agents as well.
I haven't seen any claims of that sort.
You haven't?
I've seen dozens, if not hundreds, of Ukrainian soldier mothers demanding the resignation of the defense minister and
of Ukraine.
Yes, and actually appealing that their sons should be brought back home and not used as cannon fodder in a war against their own compatriots.
What is Russia's most recent position concerning the events in Ukraine? What would be acceptable for Russia as a status for those regions where we have something like a civil war today?
You know, Russia's position has been consistent all throughout the Ukrainian crisis. It's not a crisis that Russia invented or created. It was created by other people. And if you like, I can refer to some benchmarks along the way. It all started from a simple decision by the then President Yanukovych not to refuse to sign, but actually just to postpone the signing of the association agreement with the European Union.
In November last year?
Yes, in November last year. Because he, as he explained, he needed some more time to study the document and its implications, which was a perfectly legal concern and a fair assumption. Unfortunately, some people, including some, you know, the younger generation students that had been indoctrinated for years under different Ukrainian leaderships, that association agreement is almost the same as joining the European Union, that they would be able immediately to travel without visas to the European Union, to live and work there. Some, I assume, had already packed their bags.
Well, this is
but this was, I would say, spontaneous reaction. But in the course of the winter, it evolved into something different. There were, only in the beginning, there were EU flags floated on Maidan. A few weeks later, you wouldn't see a single one. There were no portraits of Barroso, not even Cathy Ashton. There were portraits of Stepan Bandera, a well-known war criminal, and the leader of a nationalist pro-Nazi movement in the Second World War. Now, on the 21st of February, 3 European foreign ministers, the German, the French, and the Polish, together with Yanukovych and the then opposition, the 3 leaders of the opposition, signed a document. It was not Russia's initiative.
A memorandum of understanding.
A memorandum of understanding, on the basis of which Yanukovych committed himself to not to introduce martial law, state of emergency, to withdraw the police and the special forces from the center of the city, to agree to a constitutional reform and early elections. He delivered on everything.
And he offered the formation of the government to the opposition.
Of national unity.
Yes.
So the then opposition committed itself to stop violence, to vacate the seized buildings in the center of the city, to agree to constitutional reform, but first and foremost, to set up a government of national unity. 2 days later, the document which bared the signatures of 3 European foreign ministers was thrown out. And the same 3 leaders of the opposition claimed, we have established a government of victors, of winners. Then who the losers are? And, you know, all along the conflict, the Kiev authorities failed to deliver on every single of their commitments.
But if there was an understanding, why did Yanukovych run away?
At the moment, when all this happened, and it was a coup d'etat, there you couldn't find a different term for that. He was in the country. He later fled because because he feared for his personal security. But before he fled, he delivered on all his commitments. He did not declare state of emergency. He did not. He pulled out the police and the special forces, and he agreed to constitutional reform and early elections. And by the way, the agreement provided for a certain sequence of those measures. First constitutional reform and then elections. What we saw was the opposite. A government of winners, early elections before constitutional reform. Even now they've proclaimed early parliamentary elections without even changing the law on elections, which they had promised to do.
Yes, and knowing that they will not be held in some areas of the country. And then the mechanism started, and now we are in a stalemate. Coming back to the sanctions, why was there no ban on alcohol from the West?
I really don't know. Because
wine, cognac can be imported
you
freely.
know, one of all the motivations behind the those certain measures were practical economic considerations. One of the the biggest Russian banks that were put under sanctions was the Russian Agricultural Bank,
Yes.
which is the major source of credit for Russian agricultural sector. And since it was put, you know, under strain with those sanctions, its room for maneuver in providing credit for Russian domestic agriculture was limited, thus putting European exporters of produce, of meat, of dairy products in a preferential position. So that was the motive behind, you know, selecting all those elements.
And now you say it's a good situation for the country because people can start producing again under strain.
Well, it's you know, let me remind you of the situation in the 1990s, which we already discussed.
You even imported flowers from Spain and cherries and...
Well, we still import tulips from the Netherlands.
Why don't you produce them?
Well, the climate is not very favorable. It also refers to wines.
Yeah.
But in the 1990s, the Russian market sort of popped out open, and European exporters took advantage of that without any restraint or competition. So they took it for granted. And the amount of food exports to Russia has reached something between 12 and 13 billion euros.
Because you had no distribution networks inside the country.
That too. And as a result, it was stifling the domestic production. So the government has for many years now been looking for ways to promote domestic production. It has gained some successes in certain sectors, like poultry, like pork meat, some others, but not in all. So this was a situation, and the sanctions provided involuntarily an opportunity to
the
pursue
impulse to change this.
Yes.
What do you expect from the Minsk negotiations on Friday? Is there anything to come out of them?
Well, you mean the contact group?
Yes, yes, yes.
Well,
With
I
the
see.
OSCE and...
Yes, I see this as a very good starting point, because it involves the parties to the conflict. Everything else involved one party to the conflict and, you know, a number of outsiders.
Why the OSCE and not Europe?
Well, the OSCE was created to deal with issues like that. So, and the OSCE has proven to be more objective than the EU, I will claim. The OSCE has produced a peace plan bearing the name of the OSCE chairman in office, the Swiss president. How did Kiev react?
How?
It did not accept it. Poroshenko, instead of that, produced his own peace plan, which is substantially different. And how did the EU react? Fully supported, applauding with both hands the Poroshenko plan, forgetting about the OSCE plan, which I think is a shame.
And to conclude, what would be the message that you would pass to Europe, and what would be the Europe that would suit Russia's interests?
Well,
given that we are at a cross point now with the new Commission,
from
NATO changes as well.
From the viewpoint that Russia
yes.
is part of Europe and has always been, it's the largest European country, we see that there, in this, I would say, developing multipolar world of ours, there are three pillars of what we call the European civilization. One is Western Europe, or you could say the EU, the other is Russia, and the third is North America. That's an objective fact. These three pillars should work together to form, I would say, a common position in this developing multipolar world of ours. There are other centers of power. It's no longer a bipolar or much less a unipolar world. We all know that Asia is rapidly developing today, perhaps Latin America tomorrow, Africa the day after.
Brazil, or India.
Yes. So that really means that competition in the world, in the good sense, not military competition, but in terms of economic development, in terms of standards of life, that requires some concerted action without introducing any confrontations, of course. But having said this, I think Europe, Western Europe, and North America too, should not forget that there is no monopoly on truth, and there is no monopoly on values. Values are negotiable.
Does that mean that you expect Europe to accept Russia with that new Russia or without it?
Well, that new Russia is not part of values, I would say. It's, as I said, a geographical and historical term.
Mr. Chizhov, thank you for being with us. I am Dan Alexei. We are in the New Europe studios on Place Jourdan. With us today, Vladimir Chizhov, Russia's ambassador to the EU. Thank you for being with us. Thank you, Ambassador.
Thank you.